Welcome to Brentwood Presbyterian Church here in Brentwood in Burnaby, British Columbia. We're delighted to have you with us in person, online, in our live stream, and those of you who are watching this asynchronously after we post it to our YouTube channel, we're delighted to have you in that mode as well. It's a bit of an experiment for Brentwood and for the Nemr Institute. We're delighted to be working with them. Andrew Nemr, wonderful tap dancer. You'll see a lot more of that. Jillian Lebeck at the piano. We're delighted to have you this evening, Jillian. Thanks for being with us. This is a conversation in music and tap, in words, about the arts and the spirit. And we'll see where the spirit takes us with the conversation, but we really want to focus on how especially Andrew and I in our conversation. So there'll be a set of music and dance, conversation, set of music and dance. But where the Spirit takes us in our conversation about the elements that go into forming an artistic performance, a faith performance in terms of the broader application of it. So we're looking forward to that. My name is Brian Fraser. I'm the minister here at Brentwood, and we have aspired to, and I think to some extent succeeded, in creating space for these kinds of conversations, for the arts to be expressed, and for faith to be found in those expressions. So I want to invite Andrew Nemr, a wonderful tap dancer. Andrew was here in Vancouver for about a year and a half. As executive director and artistic director at the Vancouver Tap Dance Society. That's where we first hooked up and have done a couple of projects together. And Andrew's visiting Vancouver and based in Boise, Idaho now. And we're delighted to have you with us this evening. Thanks so much. So I'll turn it over to you and Jillian.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure. This is my first time playing with Jillian, so we are learning about one another as we play with one another, which is one of the joys that I find as I travel around and dance with plenty of musicians. And so, thank you for being here. The first tune we played was a tune called "Milestones." It's a particular favorite of mine. Written by Miles Davis, so it's either milestones, the things that we hit along the way, or it's Miles's tones, and so I like that kind of thing. So there's that. The second tune was a Nat Adderley composition called "Work Song," which also is it seems like songs just have this way of sneaking into us, and then I can't get out of them. So I just like playing them as much as I can, and hopefully I'll get bored at some point with them. But we're going to take it a little slower on this next song. This is called "Round About Midnight." So those last two, or this last one, rather, was a tune called Honeysuckle Rose. The music of jazz seems to have evolved like many a time over the past 150 years. And for about 7 years in New York City, I hung out with an old-time jazz band. So they were young cats playing tunes from the 10s and 20s of the last century, specifically. And that time dramatically changed my approach to my dancing, which is really interesting. Had I not had that experience, I think I'd be a different dancer today. So we're going to leave you this set with a tune that a mentor of mine used to love to play. My mentor's name was Jimmy Slide, and this tune is called All the Things You Are. of applause for Jillian, please.
Absolutely.
Great joy.
Oh, what a delight to have you back in the house.
Thank you for having
And
me.
I'm
It's a delight
glad
to
we
be
kept
here.
your tap board around.
Yeah.
The tap board, which has been used on several occasions since Andrew moved out of town, is his, and he graciously let us store it for him.
We need more of them in more
We
places.
need more of them in more places. We do indeed. Oh, thank you so, so much. What a delight to have you back in the house.
Thank you for having me.
You and I have had broad, wide-ranging conversations about faith in the arts. But one of the things that's always intrigued me, and you made reference to it in the first set, but is the way in which there's a whole plethora of influences that come into this performance on your part. The other intriguing thing that always amazes me is that, I mean, you literally met Jill 60 minutes before we went on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she brings to her remarkable mastery of the piano and the jazz mode a whole set of her influences. But you choose songs that you're both comfortable with.
Comfortable
and
enough.
there's a base of commonality there.
Yes.
Anyhow, enough of. So I'm curious for you to say more about how you understand that dynamic of forming your art, which is not unlike the dynamic of forming faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's a question that we could spend a lot of time
we
on, right?
could, and we will.
Yes. Lovely. So I think for me, I've come to understand formation from two key elements. One is immersion, and the other is apprenticeship. So when I meet a musician to play, it's not unlike two kids who meet one another on a play date. And the kids are always trying to figure out what they're playing, right? Because the rules are always evolving. You know, you'll see a kid do something and the other kid goes, "You can't do that. That's not part of the game," right? And they're learning about each other's worlds as they play together. And I think that's as close of an analogy as I've come to when it comes to something like this, where, you know, I'm learning from my perspective and my experience in the music where I can connect with Jillian and where she might be coming from and what her influences may be, and she's learning about mine. And so there's that dynamic when you meet someone on the journey, right? And then there's the dynamic that I've been thinking a lot about for myself about how do we start the journey. And my experience in tap dance land was in an old style apprenticeship, which is, at least in the US, is very, very hard to come by unless you're in a trade of some sort. They're not, the apprenticeship model is not the common learning mode. Apprenticeship model is very intimate, one-on-one or one on a few. It's almost assumed that you'll get some of the character of your teacher as well as the skill. So it's not just a transference of information, it's a transference of persona and personality. And that affects the approach of the craft. I had two main mentors as a tap dancer, Gregory Hines and Savion Glover. Their characters were dramatically different. And so as I grew out from under that like specific oversight, right, there was a kind of reconciliation that I had to do within myself between those two approaches, between those two personas, to say, how much of which one do I want to embody more and continue to pursue, even when they weren't particularly or physically around.
Two or three pieces, you've provoked two or three avenues of thought, as you always do in our conversations. The first one has to do with, and this goes to the mentoring, which I think is a really important image. As you know, I keep relating our conversations to formation for ministering with congregations.
Yeah.
I think we have fallen into a cultural trap of individualism in terms of leadership within the church. It's led to an awful lot of disillusion. It's led to an awful lot of, I like to call it rust out.
Oh, gosh.
Sam Keen used that phrase back in the 60s and 70s. But instead of burnout, it's just this kind of gradual corrosion of your energy, of your spirit, of your creativity.
You start to grind.
Yep. Yeah. And most of the grinding is off you.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but to begin to see in the mentoring, it is about the relationship. Like, it's about the whole relationship. As you say, it's not just skills, it's a relationship that offers you gifts that you then appropriate and in gratitude make your own and turn around and begin to mentor others without ever having broken the relationship. As you say, alive, dead, here, elsewhere, that relationship, the influence of that relationship is always with you.
Yeah, it's pervasive.
And you're continually reformulating it into something you offer uniquely. But then you also respect that Jillian's going through the same process. So we haven't had a chat with Jillian about who her mentors are and how she's appropriated that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe when she's back for Jazz Evensong in what, March the 27th, I think? 20th, that's it. Cool. March. So we do Jazz Evensong here at Brentwood, shameless self-promotion, every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, and Jillian's with us in a duo with a bass player, yet to be named, yet to say yes, on March the 20th, so 8 o'clock. Anyhow, we're looking forward to that evening. But so say a little bit more about how you understand the appropriation process.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Okay, so let me think where to begin. I think it's important to say a lot of my thinking around formation was kind of brought to light by reading Dallas Willard. Yeah. So that's my main influence. Richard Foster, Eugene Peterson, some of those writers, that kind of thing. But the thing that was striking for me was everything that Willard was proposing around what a person would do in apprenticeship with Jesus Christ. I had an analogy for in tap dancing. And in tap dance land, there's an assumption that mimicry happens for a time, and it's necessary, and very quickly you're kicked out of that process. And it's not do what I do, it's what are you gonna do? Yeah. And I had a coach, a tap dance teacher named Ted Levy, who was the first person to ask me the question, why should someone pay a nickel to come and see you? And in my 17-year-old, overconfidence, I said something like, because I have something to say. You can imagine that. And he said, that's not good enough. And I had a little bit of an existential crisis because I was still young. I was 17, so as a person, I wasn't fully formed. I might have thought I was, but definitely not. And it took me about 3 weeks to come back around and land on something like the kind of tap dancing that comes out of me is not like any other tap dancing that comes out of anybody else. And then the question goes to this kind of artist thing that happens, which is you have to find your voice, and you have to develop that voice. And where I've kind of landed with that is that you have one. Because you're like the specific nexus that any individual is between their personality, their experiences, their perception of the craft that they're pursuing is going to be unique.
Yeah.
And if you can trust that, like your moment where you are and the thing that you're doing and the ideas that come out of you from that practice are unique, you just have to go in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's hard if you have an overbearing mentor, or if you have a structure around you that is more corrective than encouraging.
Well, that's a lovely phrase. I will pick that up and use it shamelessly.
Yeah, please.
More
There is that
encouraging than corrective.
right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
because correction can happen in a loving environment, and it's encouraging.
Yeah.
It's not corrective
No.
in the same way,
Yeah.
right? Correction out of trying to hold somebody in or not allow them to experiment with the way that they need to play to find things out.
Yeah.
Because the pursuit is embodied, right? It's a
Yeah.
practice, whether it's tap dancing or life.
Yeah.
And it's high risk in life,
Yeah.
right? You make a choice, you have to deal with that choice. And I think the only way I've found to work those things out is in the context of a loving community.
I have a
I don't know if I answered your question, actually.
You did.
Okay.
But, well, I mean, you threw some insights onto the table to consider further.
Okay.
So, one of my favorite words is provoke, and so you've
Mhm.
provoked some further consideration in all of this. And the other piece that always intrigues me, and particularly on an evening tonight where you and Jillian have just met, is to watch all of that happen in conversation with each other. And in the second set, if you haven't been doing it already, keep an eye on their faces and the connection that takes place. And I was seeing it because I was sitting where I could see Jillian's face. But every now and then, often, there's this little twinkle, this little smile. Oh yeah, I kind of like that. Okay, well, what if we go in this direction, right? And so it's this conversation. It's this relationship that creates space for you to express yourself in your voice and Jillian to express herself in her voice. And so I think that interdependence, that collaboration, that constant, I mean, there's a sense in which there's an ongoing reconciliation taking place there.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of parallels that I could spend the rest of the short time we have talking about what would happen if we began to mentor and train clergy to have the kind of interchange and collaboration that we see in the two of you, but that's a whole other evening.
Well, I think it's worthwhile to say that we're having a generative conversation. Like we're talking about something that we both have a multitude of reference points for.
Yeah, and a deep love for.
Deep care for. We've spent immense amount of time immersing ourselves in not only what this music was, but what it can be.
Yeah, and what you're making of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, and our particular preferences and what we like, and when I coach tap dancers, there's always this, well, what's the right thing to do when you improvise? And it's like, well, what do you like?
Yeah.
Right? It's actually, if you trust that in something like tap dancing and see that it's not a bad thing, then maybe the idea that personal desires can be transformed to desire what is good is actually possible.
Yeah.
And then we can trust our own desires for the things that are good and just work from there.
Yeah. It's one of the ways that I often talk about it in relationship, especially to church governing systems in churches, is, are they prescriptive or are they permissive? And I think Presbyterianism at its best is permissive. And we've made it ridiculously prescriptive.
It feels like being prescriptive is easier.
Yeah, well, it is. Right?
Until it isn't.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right. Yes.
Like,
yes.
It's easy to get people to do what you want until they have to do it on their own.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So there's one other area that I want to explore a little bit with you. So a friend and colleague of mine, Sarah Travis, who teaches at Knox College in Toronto, Sarah's got a grant from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship to do a book, a study of play in worship, of playful worship. It's not something that comes natural to her. She would be the first one to admit it.
Oh, fun.
But she has a daughter. They were here a couple of months ago, but she has a daughter who loves to dance in the middle of worship.
There you go.
Right, and so she and Paul, her dad, came up and danced a couple of times. But I'm curious. So say a little bit about how you understand the playfulness of what you do.
Yeah.
And related it a little bit to worship.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think play fundamentally is experimentation. Right? It's having the permission to discover, to not have to think about what you do before you do it, but discover what you're doing as it's happening. And there's lots of research in high-performance athletics about flow state and those kinds of things. And I think play is the practice to get there. Right? Play is the thing where we discover the natural tendencies of our choices, whatever they might be. And then we might say, well, I didn't actually like that outcome. And it's kind of, I think of it like a petri dish, right? It's a small, concise, guarded experiment. So you can play in a play space, right? And I have fallen many times here, but it hasn't necessarily hurt anybody else, right? So the play space is guarded that way. And I think to know that we can play and be free to play in the context of a loving God, in the context of a community of love, allows for the development of the muscle of choice making in the moment.
Yeah, I like that. The other, she has I sit on a kind of thought provokers committee with her, 3 or 4 others. And one of the things we talked about this week when we were chatting, in terms of opening people up, in church especially, opening people up to that sense of playfulness, was reformulating our understanding of God as a playful God.
Oh, yeah.
As a permissive God, as a God who is experimenting, in a sense, with all of us. And so I think it's especially for older Presbyterians to help them imagine a playful God is an important opening to giving them permission, to freeing them up to become more playful. The other thing we said was to make sure they bring their grandkids to church.
Well, and that would help, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the reminder.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to tell their grandkids not to do that.
Right.
They might start to do that in church, right? But then you give them permission. No, let the kid run
It's
around.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a wonderful, the analogy of a father is striking and can be important, even though I think in some areas there might be a move away from it. So my dad was not authoritarian.
Right.
And I would have been considered kind of a free and strong-willed child. And the way my dad because I asked him, I said, well, how did you raise me to be able to say, I want to do this and actually think it's possible and try it out? And he said, we just had guardrails. Like, you were able to do whatever it is that you wanted to do, and then if we saw that you were going, one way that wouldn't have been beneficial for you,
Right.
we'd put up a guardrail, and you would hit it, and it wouldn't feel good, but at least it was us that was putting it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you'd bounce back, and you'd play over here and
Yep.
try and figure it out. And I think knowing that that's part of what is possible
Yeah.
in the formation of our person,
Yeah.
that there is the possibility of guardrails, and they're put up in love. And that freedom can be a good thing, because then we're free to do what is good.
Yes. And that phrase I love, free to do what is good.
Yeah.
And then in that dialogue, in that conversation, in that playful interchange with God, find out more and more about what is good.
And how that comes
Love,
out.
joy,
Yep.
peace,
Mhm.
patience, kindness, generosity.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was striking when I first heard that phrase to realize that there was some part of me that felt that freedom was inherently bad, because it was always the freedom to do what is wrong,
What is
or what is
wrong.
not good,
Yeah.
or what is
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
destructive.
yeah.
And you're like, how ingrained was that in me to be surprised that if somebody says I'm free, I'm always going that way, or not even thinking about, oh, I'm free to do what is good.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note,
Sweet.
thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's always
Thank
a
you.
delight to be in conversation with you. Thank you for listening in. Delighted to have you as part of the conversation as well. Let's do some more music.
Yeah. Jillian, would you like
Jillian,
to
thank you again
come
for
up?
being with us. What a delight. Great to have you back in the house.
Sweet. So we've got a couple more tunes. Thank you. And let's see. Oh, yeah. All right, so we're just going to play, and then we'll talk about them. So that was one way to get through Well You Needn't, which is Thelonious Monk tune. Talking about unique voices in the jazz world, Thelonious Monk has a special place in many tap dancers' hearts because he's so quirky. Like, every tune has a thing about it, and it's very, very clear that it's Monk's thing. And so in the tap dance world, like, everybody you meet is like, can we play a Monk tune? Please, can we just play a Monk tune? Yeah, very much a thing. And the first tune was a tune called Miserlou. Miserlou? Miserlou. All right. And that's actually the first time that I've ever played that. So thank you for that. Next, we're going to play a ballad, followed by a Brad Mehldau tune. Two back-to-back. So we're going to try something that's not a tune. We just met about 2 hours ago, and we're going to figure out what comes to mind, just if we sit and play. All right, fair enough. All right, for our last tune, we're going to play a Wayne Shorter tune called Footprints. Thank you again, Jillian. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to play. Thank you again, Brian, for having us. And my name is Andrew Nemr. It's been a pleasure to be here and to play a little. So, Footprints.
Jillian Lebeck on the piano. Andrew Nemr on tap. What a delight to be part of the playfulness of tonight. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here and getting these kinds of conversations deepened here at Brentwood. Delight. I want to say a special word of thanks to Jim Smith, our Minister in Association, our live stream guy. Delighted to have his skills with us in this amazing little place. It's a privilege. The congregation here at Brentwood has been wonderful in cultivating and creating space for this sort of conversation to go on, and so we're deeply grateful to them and to everyone who participates. Those of you who have been with us on the live stream, thanks for being with us in that mode. For those of you watching later, and hopefully we've sown some seeds that will provoke faith and that whole sense of freedom for the good. One of the great phrases that Andrew has left with us this evening. Take care. God bless. Thanks again for being here.